We would like to recognize and thank the primary author of the State Judiciary box set paper, Ms. Jennifer Fahey. Thank you, Jennifer, for your insight into this area of practice, particularly as you discuss considerations for positive working relationships between prosecution and community corrections organizations. Now we'd like to introduce our featured presenter, Mr. Peter Ozanne, Chief Operating Officer for Public Safety in Multnomah County, Oregon. Additional information on Peter's bio and all of our panelists can be found on our website. Peter graduated Stanford Law School in 1971, and since admission to the California and Oregon state bars, Peter has served as a state public defender and a federal prosecutor, a partner in a private law firm in San Francisco Bay Area and Portland, a tenured law professor at the University of Oregon, and a visiting professor of law at the University of San Francisco. He has also served as a senior policy advisor to 3 Oregon governors, the first chair of Oregon's Sentencing Guidelines Commission, vice chair of the Oregon Investment Council, chief counsel to the U.S. Attorney in Oregon, the first executive director of Multnomah County's local Public Safety Coordinating Council, and the first executive director of Oregon's Office of Public Defense Services. Peter has also been an instructor at the National Judicial College and the National Institute of Trial Advocacy. Currently, Peter is responsible for advising the Multnomah County, Oregon Chair and Board of Commissioners on public safety policies, budget priorities, and crime reduction strategies in addition to evidence-based practices. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Kate.
Next, we have Mr. Roy Austin. Roy returned to the Civil Rights Division as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, Criminal Section of the United States Department of Justice in January 2010. Roy previously served as a Senior Assistant United States Attorney and Coordinator of the D.C. Human Trafficking Task Force in the Federal Major Crimes Section in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. He began his career as an honors trial attorney with the U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Criminal Section. In 2002, he joined the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, where he prosecuted domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, homicide, and public corruption cases. He is also an adjunct law professor at George Washington University Law School and the American University Washington College of Law. Roy received his BA from Yale University and his JD from the University of Chicago. Welcome, Roy. Next, we have Mr. Brent Berkeley. Mr. Berkeley is the Assistant Director of Programs for the National District Attorneys Association National Advocacy Center in Columbia, South Carolina, and also serves as the Director of the National Center for Community Prosecution for NDAA. He is a graduate of Weber State University and the University of Utah College of Law. Mr. Berkeley has been a prosecutor for 13 years and has worked at every level of prosecution, handling everything from traffic offenses to criminal appeals to capital homicide. He has been with NDAA since 2008 and has worked on gangs, guns, and community prosecution initiatives with a focus on innovative mechanisms of crime prevention, improving community involvement with the criminal justice system, and providing outreach and training to rural communities. Mr. Berkeley also speaks frequently on issues relating to prosecution ethics and motivation, gun violence, gangs, domestic and sexual violence, impaired driving, and trial advocacy skills. Welcome, Brent.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Finally, I'd like to introduce Mr. Chauncey Parker, Executive Assistant District Attorney for Crime Prevention in New York City, New York. Chauncey Parker serves as Executive Assistant District Attorney for Crime Prevention. Mr. Parker also serves as the Director of the New York, New Jersey High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, a federally funded program that invests in federal, state, and local law enforcement partnerships designed to disrupt the market for illegal drugs. A veteran of more than 23 years in criminal justice, Mr. Parker began his career in the District Attorney's Office, serving for 5 years in the Trial Division and in the Office of the New York City Special Narcotics Prosecutor. Mr. Parker next served for 10 years as an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, serving in the Organized Crime Unit. Mr. Parker left the Southern District to serve for 5 years as the Director of Criminal Justice for New York State and Commissioner of the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services under Governor George E. Pataki, where he oversaw all state criminal justice agencies, including the New York State Police, New York Department of Correctional Services, and New York State Parole. Mr. Parker is a member of the board of the Police Athletic League, Harlem Day Charter School, and Joyful Heart Foundation. He is a graduate of Rollins College and Duke University School of Law. Welcome, Chauncey.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time with us, and at this time, I'd like to hand over our webinar to Mr. Peter Ozanne, our featured presenter and moderator for our discussion.
Thanks, Kate. I'd like to welcome all of you in the audience. I know we have a significant, important group of professionals, and I hope we can make this worth your while. As you know from the biographies of our panelists, we have some great resources, so we're going to try to maintain our time so that we provide as much time as possible to answer your questions. But before we get started and be sure our questions and discussions are on target, we'd like to have you respond to another poll. So which of the following describes your current professional role? So the results are we have 2% who are prosecutors, 2% who are defense attorneys or public defenders. We have community corrections is the most represented at 66%, and then others, which I assume are a variety of justice professionals who are interested in this topic. It's very helpful, and we'll, of course, tailor our comments and our questions accordingly. Let me take a moment to frame some of the issues that we discuss in the general topic. I noted at the first that 3% of the audience are in the federal system, and I think all of you professionals out there in the audience and my panel members know that really the major volume of work is done at the state and county levels. The federal system, of course, does critically important things. Prosecution of interstate crime and increasingly over the years other kinds of crimes as the resources have got fewer and fewer at the local level, and the federal government has been able to provide more resources. But it's noteworthy to say that we have, of course, on our panel both federal and local prosecutors to give that perspective. On the slide, you'll note that we've quoted from the American Bar Association, the duty of the prosecutor is to seek justice, not merely to convict. And I know my colleagues on the panel will have a considerable amount to say about that. I personally have always viewed with skepticism our interest in war metaphors. We have war on crime, we have war on drugs, we're often battling and fighting crime. And I think most of us would agree, while we all want to be tough on crime, we want to be smart on crime, and we want to reduce crime. And in that context, I think it's easier to consider that really prosecutors are the guardians of justice. We unfortunately have some publicity from time to time, and probably all of you have experienced overzealous prosecutions in your jurisdiction. But really, the prosecutor, along with the judge, is probably the most important player in ensuring balanced and justice and due process. So we'll talk more about that, and you may have questions about that as the webinar progresses. I've noted over the years, and I've had considerable years now in this business, almost 40, both as a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and also more recently responsible for budgets of prosecutors, that traditionally prosecutors have been pretty good at responding to a serious crime and less serious crime as well, and prosecuting vigorously, particularly violent crime. Generally, a traditional role, I guess, in my opinion, has been reactive, responding to cases brought to them by police and other law enforcement agencies. And I think we're starting to see, and I think my panelists, my colleagues would agree on the panel, that increasingly we're seeing that reactive role is not sufficient, that really prosecutors' offices have to be more proactive to really address crime and reduce it, and again be smart about prosecuting crime. Hence the notion of community prosecution. This has certainly started earliest, I would believe, from enhance the quality of life in the community. As you can see, the word proactive appears in there, and obviously you can, as all of you know who are familiar with community prosecution, it involves relationships and partnerships. So let's talk briefly about the principles underlying community prosecution. The first principle, obviously, is recognizing the community's role in public safety. It should be obvious to us, but it took us a number of years that maybe the community knows what its problems are, and we should listen to those problems. They may be different priorities than we in our law offices think are priorities. So principle number one is really recognizing the community's role in public safety. Secondly, engaging in problem solving. And again, at least from my perspective, I think this was really borrowed from problem solving policing. It's very much similar to that. Once having heard the problem, working with the community and the partners and developing solutions to the problems. And of course, again, to do this, it's a constant effort to establish and maintain partnerships. And finally, evaluating outcomes. Most of you have heard by now in the terms of performance measurement that there are outputs and outcomes. And again, I think prosecutors' offices have been very good about measuring outputs, number of cases processed, number of prosecutions. The question is, what's the outcome in terms of public safety? And that really takes us, I think, to evidence-based practice, which I think fundamentally is paying attention to what are our outcomes and how we're going to measure them. You have on the screen, or about to be on the screen, the principles of evidence-based practice. I think this screen really raises 2 points. The first is, in my view, this screen really reflects the part of the justice system, the part of the justice profession that's really led the way with evidence-based practice, and that is corrections, and particularly community corrections. And these principles that are laid out here in the diagram really directly relate to community corrections. And I think as prosecutors, and again, my panelists, my colleagues on the panel will probably agree that a competent, community-oriented prosecutor needs to know these principles, needs to know what happens to the people they prosecute, what are the most effective programs, and how do corrections people deal with recidivism and crime reduction. And then secondly, of course, to what extent have those principles been integrated into community prosecution? And I would give my own view that I think we're still, it's a work in progress. We're certainly starting to measure our outcomes more effectively, measure crime reduction rather than just output. And I think we're looking at how to target communities with targeted intervention. So we're using some of these principles, but as I say, I think it's still a work in progress. So before we get started with the panelists and let them do more talking and me more listening, we'd like to know, in your jurisdiction or you personally, having seen what we think community prosecution is, how many of you or in your jurisdictions are utilizing community prosecution principles? And of course, there's another poll for you to fill out. Well, the results are we have 28% that definitely say yes, 20% saying no, 2 not yet, kind of consistent with my notion of a work in progress, and 50% are unsure. Hopefully, by the time we're done today, maybe people will be able to say whether yes or no they have those principles operating and practices operating in their jurisdictions. So let's turn to the first question that we have, which I think reflects some of the problems we have